Corruption as a hindrance to recovery is nothing new, but what's outstanding about the survey is how it's twice of a concern compared to other factors such as inflation and rising oil prices. Why is that, and where are the CEOs coming from?
Okay. Well, first, let me say that timing is very, very important here. No? Last year, when we asked the same question to the CEOs, the greatest concern then was vaccination rollout,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, because COVID-19 and continuous lockdowns were at that time hampering economic recovery. This year, we have addressed the health crisis, so we're back to tackling the old problems. And of course, the problem of corruption has been there for so long, right? But
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, we have not made significant progress. In fact, as you know, our ranking in the corruption perception index, excuse me, is 117 out of
Mm-hmm.
180 countries. And we are the worst performing among the so-called ASEAN Big Six. Now, this is a very valid concern that the CEOs are raising as corruption scares investors. No, it can complicate doing business in a country. Of course, it can lead to unfair competition, delay some of the business processes, and it will increase cost, of course, because of those delays. And overall, it can hurt business viability. Now, whether corruption is perceived or real,
Mm-hmm.
it is making the country unattractive to investors, both foreign and domestic, but of course, more so to foreign. And of course, all things equal, if you can do business in a place where there's better transparency, more efficient processes, and greater accountability, why would you choose otherwise, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, like what you mentioned earlier, it's definitely a valid concern here. But question is, where does this put us then in terms of investment climate, especially in terms of attracting investments here, as we try to eat a slice of the pie in a competition with our neighbors here, especially in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit more about that. So the previous administration has done quite a number of things to attract investors. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
passage of Create, which lowered the corporate income tax. Of course, we tried to open the economy a little bit more through the amendments to the Public Service Act, the Retail Trade Liberalization, and the Foreign Investment Act. But we are still losing our competitiveness against our ASEAN neighbors, no? And because we are facing a lot of challenges, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the high cost of doing business, our high power cost, also in terms of availability of talent and the talent's aptitude for innovation, critical thinking, and business and digital skills. And of course, we also need to improve our quality of infrastructure and logistical services, including connectivity and digital infrastructure. We also need to invest more on research and development. And of course, you know, we've talked about transparency, respect for the sanctity of contracts, and overall ease of doing business.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that having a pool of young English speaking
Mm-hmm.
workforce was enough, but not anymore because our neighbors are also leveling up when it comes to that. So we need to address the other areas where we are falling behind.
Okay, you already mentioned there are a number of things, of course, that the government needs to put in place in order to bust corruption. But one thing we have to point out also, like what you mentioned earlier, the timing of the survey, this happened July to August this year, very much so at the start of the new administration. Were you able to gather at least some insight or a sense of how optimistic CEOs are in terms of the new administration's capability to actually stifle corruption?
Well, that's not really covered in the survey, but we'd like to note that while, you know, the new administration has not really covered corruption in the SOLNA, but during the campaign period, then President candidate Marcos mentioned that, you know, all government disbursements will be done in the proper channels, no, and following the law. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that sort of gives the investors and the business community a good starting point to also expect that the new administration will make good of that commitment.
But do you think the mere fact that the president did not mention a fight against corruption in his sauna and his previous speeches, do you think that in a way also sounded alarm bells here for management
Well,
leaders?
I suppose there are a lot of other very, very urgent matters that he needed to tackle
Mm.
during the sauna, right? But of course, hearing the president talk about such an important concern would also give investors a bit more comfort sana, no?
Okay, but again, I mean, corruption is a marriage between the government and the private sector. Let's face it. I mean, the private firms have had their own fair share as to why corruption is the way it is now in the Philippines. So, what can Philippine companies do better to address corruption as well?
Yeah, so thanks so much for that question, Jess. I think it's a very good question because the battle against corruption is such a massive task, no? And it will take collaboration between the private and the public sector. Of course, we know already, from the government side, what government needs to do is to pursue automation and digitalization of government services, right? To somehow reduce human intervention. And of course, the Philippine Business Hub is a good start, but we need to do a lot more. From the private sector, we also need to make that commitment to corporate integrity. We've talked about ESG a lot the past few weeks, the past few months, and that's part of the G in ESG. Other stakeholders also have an important role to play. We work with a lot of foreign investors, and they avoid investing in companies that engage in questionable practices. And we are also seeing that employees prefer to work with companies whose values align with theirs. And we're seeing that, consumers are now more conscious about this also, as they are starting to vote with their wallets now by supporting companies that are deemed to demonstrate good business practices. So we are slowly seeing the tide shift, but we need to do this together consistently to make an impact.